Welcome back to our sixth video on prayer. I'm really excited about this week's video because we're going to be discussing something that for me personally has been one of the most practical and useful helps in my own personal prayer life. And we're going to center this discussion around the question what should I pray about? There are two options that might happen to you when you come to pray. You know prayer is important. You know that it should be a vital part of your spiritual life. But then when you actually take the time and sit down to pray, you might sit there and your mind goes completely blank. You can't you can't think of anything to say. Or you might have the opposite problem where you sit down and then you just start thinking of everything. You've got too much stuff in your head and it's all jumbled around, it's all mixed up. And as we're coming to today's discussion, what we're going to be doing is giving you kind of a model or a template to go through as you pray, to provide a couple of things for you. Now, one of the first things I really hope this template of prayer gives is some structure. When I think of structure, I think of our bones. Your body wouldn't have any structure without your bones. You'd just be a lump or a blob. And although the skeleton doesn't fill out everything, it gives a structure for everything to kind of be built around. So I like this model of prayer, this prayer template a lot. First of all, because it can provide structure for my prayers. Another reason why I really like this template of prayer that we're going to be talking about is the order it comes in. So not only does it provide kind of a structure for my prayers, I really like the way in which it is ordered and the way in which the order kind of brings my mind and my thoughts through the process of praying. And then a third reason why I really like this template for prayer is that it feels complete. It doesn't focus on only one aspect or another. It focus when I get done praying in this way. I feel like I've given a complete prayer. There aren't really any elements missing. Now, with all that being said, there are other models of prayer, there are other templates for you to use, but for me, this has been one that I have found particularly helpful in shaping and forming my own prayer life. And it's built around an acronym, and the acronym is ACTS, ACTS. And as we go through it, I'm just going to kind of give you what each letter stands for. So one of the things I like about it is I can remember acts, and if I remember everything that goes with it, I can kind of pray through that in my mind. I don't need anything else really memorized or to look at. So let's look at what those things stand for. In the ACTS method, we have adoration, confession, thanks or thanksgiving, and supplication. As I said, this is a template. It's not a memorized prayer, and it's not just praying whatever comes into your mind as it comes into your mind. For me, it's helpful because it kind of gives me categories to think through and work through as I'm praying, and provides some of that form, that structure, that order. And then it also keeps me kind of from focusing on only the area I've been thinking about, or kind of getting narrow-minded in my prayers. So some of these elements we've talked about in other videos like thanks, but I kind of want to run through each one and explain it a little bit, and then give a biblical example of that element of this prayer template. And as I said, I really like the template because it provides some structure, but also flexibility. So, although I'm going through the categories, I can be thinking about what I personally want to say in my adoration or confession or thanks or the supplications I have to God. So there's structure, but there's also freedom and flexibility within this system. And it's why as I've said, have found it so personally and practically useful. And in fact, I'd say that almost all of the time when I'm praying, I'm kind of thinking through these categories as I'm praying, and it's been very influential in my own prayer life. So now let's kind of break them down and look at each element by itself. So starting with adoration. When I think of adoration, one of the things I kind of think of is from weddings. So in a wedding, kind of the big moment in a lot of weddings is when the bride appears. And I think, like most people, you kind of enjoy seeing the bride and all the faces and turn towards her. But there are a lot of us who like when that moment happens to sneak a peek over at the groom and just see his reaction to seeing his bride coming down the aisle. And usually you can tell at that moment that guy is obsessed with and in love with and just adores the person coming down the end of the aisle. So when we start out with adoration, one of the things we are doing is we are looking at God and praising and extolling him for who he is. And it's really a reminder to us of the person we are praying to as we come into prayer. And I'll distinguish it a little bit from thanks when we get there. I think there's a slight difference, but an important distinction between the two. An example of a prayer with a lot of adoration in it comes from Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel 2. So we're going to look at that and look for the parts of this prayer that are really focused on who God is and his character, his attributes, just adoring him for who he is. Let me get out of the way here. And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord. For there is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Do not let arrogance come from your mouth, for the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed." So in this, we have a prayer where she's really just mainly focusing on how good God is, how strong God is, how holy God is, and just praising him for who he is, adoring him, talking about how magnificent God's attributes are. So for me, this is a really helpful exercise when I pray to start at that point. It really adds an element of worship into my prayers that when I remember and think about and speak about who God is and the wonderful attributes he has. And whatever you're going through in your life, you might focus on particular attributes at different times and in different days or different times you come to prayer. You might focus on his holiness, or you might focus on his power. You might focus on his righteousness or justice or goodness or glory or majesty. There's all these different things that we can focus on and adore God for in prayer. I think about as Jesus teaches his disciples to pray, he tells them to begin, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven." And in just a short section, Jesus has described a lot of things that we worship and adore God for. We just adore Him because He's our heavenly Father. He's entered into a father relationship with us. We adore Him because He's in heaven, and we look forward to the time when we can be with Him. We want His name to be honored and reverenced. What's that saying? That's saying God is so worthy of our adoration that we need to be careful how we use His name. We treat Him as a king and a sovereign when we say that. We adore Him for being the sovereign Lord and King over all. We pay respect to the fact that His will is good. He is a good God. And so we say, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So even in statements like that, they're just packed with adoration. And it's just, for me, a very grounding exercise to start my prayer in this way of just focusing on who God is and expressing that in my prayer. Now, after we focus on who God is, then we have the other element of focusing on who we are, and that is done in confession. And really here we're going to be talking about there are different kinds of confession. So in adoration, we're focused on who God is. In our confession, we're focusing on who we are. And as we exercise this, it's not something very pleasant or that many of us like to do a lot of. In fact, when I think of our day and age that we're living in, confession is kind of something unusual and odd because we live in the social media age where everybody is trying to present an idealized version of themselves. A version of themselves that looks good, that's appealing, that might make some other people jealous or envious. And so we have this, presentation of ourselves in an ideal state, not as we actually are. When we confess to God, though, what we're really doing is saying, hey, look, you're a good and a righteous God, and I'm a sinful person. You are holy, I'm unholy. You're righteous, I'm unrighteous. You're glorious and I'm shameful. You're strong and I'm weak. In a way, it's a reminder of why we go to God in prayer. Because He is all these wonderful and powerful and good things that we are not. That's why we are the prayer and He is the one we are praying to. And I'll just say that this is such an important discipline to remind ourselves of who we are, to remind ourselves of our sin and our necessity of going to God for forgiveness. The psalmist brings this out in the following passage. Let me get out of the way here. I acknowledge my sin to you, and I did not cover my iniquity. I said, I will confess my transgressions to the Lord, and you forgave the iniquity of my sin. Selah. Psalm 32, 5. So in that passage, we just have this a beautiful picture of what confessing your sin does as you go before the Lord. As we bring our sinfulness to Him, as we set it before Him, it's a reminder that we need His forgiveness, that we need His grace. And in a way, it's an act of faith, saying, I trust the Lord. I trust that He's going to be able to handle who I am. I trust the fact that the cross and the power of Christ is greater than my sin and unrighteousness. Therefore, I bring it and I lay it before Him. I don't hide who I am from God or what I'm going through. So these are kind of the first stages, and I said I really like the flow of it. We begin by focusing on who God is. And by the way, if we want to get a proper view of ourselves, we've got to first see who God is. We never really understand our own sin or our own unrighteousness until we see the pure, spotless, glorious righteousness and perfection of God. So in a way, this adoration and confession kind of go hand in hand of seeing who God is and then recognizing who I am in light of that and confessing that before God. So we have adoration, confession, and then we have thanks. Oop, that's a little big. We have thanks that we give to God, or thanksgiving. And now this is a little bit different. You might think, well, didn't we already give thanks to God in adoration? Well, yes, in a way. Adoration is really focused on praising or thanking God for who He is and what His attributes are. Whereas thanks or thanksgiving really focuses on kind of two other elements, which are slightly different. And it is what He has given to us and what He has done for us. So whereas you might focus on God's grace and God's beauty in the abstract, you might give thanks for particular ways in which God has expressed and shown those attributes to you personally. This is, for me, a helpful order because in a way, God is always good even when I suffer and am going through difficult things. And when I remember that, it allows me to give thanks in more difficult circumstances. Whereas if I focus on just the things I have or the things God has done for me, and that's my starting point, I can have a tendency to fall into or fall prey to a way of thinking and looking at God where His purpose is just to meet my needs or to give me things. Whereas when I focus at first on adoring Him for who He is, confessing who I am in light of that, that really opens up a proper way to give thanks to me, for me, to God and all the good things He's done. A recognition of the good gifts He's given, a recognition of His faithfulness to me in the past. So in thanks, that's what I'm really focusing on. What has God given to me? What has He done for me? And just pouring out thanks for that. We see examples of this in the Psalms. And by the way, with each of these, I could give you tons of verses. So I'm just kind of cherry picking a few that illustrate these things. Psalm 9:1. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart. I will recount all of your wonderful deeds. As we spent a decent amount of time last week on Thanksgiving, I'm not going to go over it too much in this video. You can go back to that video if you started kind of here in the middle and look at a picture of that. So next comes supplication in the Acts. So we have adoration, confession, thanksgiving, and now supplication. Supplication is what we ask God for, what we were entreating God for. In previous weeks, we talked about how this really needs to be both a presentation of our will before God and a reorientation of our will and our desires before God as we go to Him. When I think of this, I just think of, putting our hands out before God and asking Him for things. So usually when I come to prayer and I don't have kind of this method in my mind, it very much centers around my supplication and what I'm asking, what I'm wanting from God. And so for me, it's actually helpful to have this thing at the end after going through this other list, and it just kind of reorients me. It helps ground my prayers a lot more. And I find it really helpful. Otherwise, it feels a lot of times when I pray like I'm just asking or begging or just so focused on my needs that I don't really see or connect with God in a meaningful way in my prayers. So a passage we have for this comes in Philippians 4:6. We've been using this a lot. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So in that we have, us bringing our supplications before God and letting our requests be made known to Him. Just letting God know what we're worried about, what we're concerned about, and laying those things before Him because we recognize, again, that He's the one who's given us every good gift, that He in and of Himself is a good and a gracious God. So just to review real quick, this method, it is, I'm pressing all the wrong buttons today. Adoration, confession, thanks, and supplication. This is the ACTS method. As I said, this is kind of a model or a template for your prayer that you can run through as you're praying. And as I've said, for me personally, this has added a lot of richness, a lot of depth. I like the structure, I like the order of it, and I like that afterwards I feel like I've covered most of the basis in prayer going through this method. This isn't the only method or model. There are other good ones out there, but I just wanted to share this one because it's been so important to me and has shaped my prayer life so much. I hope that you find it useful. I hope that you find it practical. And I hope if you're struggling with not having anything to pray for, or having so much to pray for you don't know how to organize it or categorize it, that this method would be helpful to you. Thanks so much. Hope to see you next time.